All right, guys. Welcome back to part three on mental health with clinical psychologist Pete Kelly. So we're having a blast with this interview
We are.
so far. And if you missed the other parts, feel free to follow them in order 1, 2, and 3. So for this about 20 minutes that we have left in this podcast, we wanted to ask you if you have any tips in regards to either mental health or just people in general for their well-being. We know that the life nowadays, we have less and less time. People are sleeping less and less. They have kids. They're busy. We do more hours at work. Cost of life is rising up. Not so much now with the COVID-19. But
right.
So in your, go ahead if you have any tips.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think if there was a book that I could give out on the street corners, there would be 2 of them. The first one's called The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris.
Okay.
And I really, really love the tools and strategies that are in that book. It talks a lot about how we have unrealistic expectations of being happy. We believe that if we have bad emotions, then we failed, that emotions are just bad, period. So he does a really good job of myth busting around all the dysfunctional beliefs that we have about our inner experience. And it's really couched in this platform that's called acceptance and commitment therapy, which I really, really like. And then the other book that I would recommend for people is called Reinventing Your Life by Jeffrey Young and some other folks, but I forget the co-authors. It's to do with schema therapy. It talks about core beliefs, undoing childhood trauma, things like that. Can't recommend it enough. I think
that's something you said you were doing, a schema therapy?
Yeah, schema therapy, yep. So I think it's a really powerful form of therapy. And when I'm doing that work with people, I'll often get them to buy the book and then we'll kind of work through it together ultimately as a therapeutic intervention. I really think that people can get a lot of mileage out of doing mindfulness meditation. I think that's mandatory. Exercise, like I mentioned before, I think that should be mandatory. Yeah. I think in general, a lot of people could benefit from doing some work with respect to their beliefs about uncertainty and uncontrollability. Okay. Most people want way too much control in a way that's unrealistic for what's going on. Some folks have a lot of trouble tolerating uncertainty. So I think the more that we can take a realistic look at the actual amount of control that we have and then select our coping accordingly, and then also learn to tolerate uncertainty and have a different view of it. Same with failure. So I don't know where somewhere along the line, failure got a bad name. Yeah. But if you want to be good at something, you've got to be willing to be bad at first to learn how to do that, right? So if we could just reconceptualize failure as sort of more learning, then I think we'd be a lot better off. We live in a very perfectionistic society where you've got to be awesome at something before you even start. You can put it online, you expect to get 1 billion likes out of it. I think we've lost a sense of incrementalism, building something slowly and comparing yourself to who you were yesterday, not who other people are today. Yeah. So I think those are really, those would be key principles to pass along to people. It's hard to learn how to tolerate uncertainty because we're wired not to like it. But if you think about it, just as many cool and awesome things come out of uncertainty as do bad things. I'm not sure how you guys met, but that came out of uncertainty, right? Your relationship came out of circumstances nobody could have imagined at some point in your lives, right? So it's not only bad things that come out of uncertainty, it's also good things. So it's about just, it's really a lot of Buddhist type principles if you're into that sort of thing.
Yeah, we are. I love that stuff. So you're hitting the right chords there.
Yeah, so I think those Buddhist type principles, which show up a lot in acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT as it's sometimes called, I think that's a really nice toolkit for people to develop, as opposed to the cultural tools that we have right now, which is sort of, if you're not happy all the time, you're doing something wrong. If you don't have an amazing car, and if you are unhappy, you know what? If you buy a car, that will fix that, which of course it doesn't.
No. Yeah.
Right. So we've got this broken materialistic kind of narrative that's making us kind of depressed and anxious and hopeless and isolated. So I think we can turn back to what we've known for a long time, that life is full of pain. The trick is to make it only as painful as it needs to be and not add layers of suffering on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very good tip.
Yes, I agree.
Amazing.
Yeah, and I know that's a little bit ethereal. That's honestly, when those ideas, and I think you'd know this from your own lives if you work with stuff like that, you really have to struggle with it yourself to get it, right? It's not something where you just read it, you're like, oh, that's great, I got it. You have to struggle and to really work to bend your mind into understanding and internalizing those principles.
Yes, no, exactly. And
Absolutely.
I think especially in the society we're living, which is capitalism, it's acquiring more materials. And I find, I remember I used to work at the jail, and then there was a guy who bought a pickup truck, big ass truck, and
Yep.
he doesn't need it, doesn't have a cottage, doesn't work construction, anything. Then the next day, the other boss buys a pickup. Everybody had pickups, so there was like 6 pickups in the parking lot, and none of them needed it. And it was
Right.
who had the bigger suspension, everything. Anyways, the short story is I think people compare a lot each other to what they have and what they acquired instead of being content with what they actually have.
Right.
Maybe something you're teaching gratitude, right? So when you wake up, instead of looking at what you don't have, look at what you have and appreciate
what you have.
Right. I mean, one thing that I'm really getting from this whole COVID-19 situation is just how much I would appreciate having a normal day at the moment.
Right.
Like how, just going to my office, meeting with my colleagues, being able to touch a doorknob without worrying about dying.
Yeah.
So there's so much to be grateful for in everyday life that's invisible to us because we get used to it. And there's a name for this, right? It's called hedonic adaptation. It's like in a relationship, right? You meet the person for the first year, you're walking on clouds, and then, by 5 years later, you're living with them, and it's just like you're used to it. So that's sort of the curse of being a human being, is that we're wired to seek out sensation, things that are different and exciting, but you get used to them over time. But what happens when you get used to them, you start to take them for granted until they're taken away.
Yes, and then you want them again.
And then you realize.
Then you want them again. So I think what we can all take away from this situation is just to realize how fragile our amazing existences are, what a miracle it is to live in the society that we live in, and to really be incredibly grateful every day that everything just kind of works seamlessly.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're getting a window into now what can go wrong and how easily it can all go wrong, right? And we should have been way more grateful beforehand. But classic humans, we're gonna learn after the fact, after we get our butts handed to us. But that's the way we learn.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And for the meantime, what we try to do is to make the most of it. Like some people, they were working so much that they couldn't wait to ask for a break, but under normal circumstances, they wouldn't have had as long of a break.
That's right.
So that's on the other side, you can look at it as like, this is a period of rest. You can rest at home. You can spend time with your spouse, wife, whoever lives under your household, children, whatever, and have quality time.
Yeah. So
I think things will
positive, right?
Absolutely. I think things will be different for a lot of people post this, right? I think people are going to establish patterns in relating to their family that they're not going to want to undo when things go back to quote unquote normal. But the thing is, there's no going back to normal, because you can't. It's like when somebody dies, right? You tell them like things are never going to be the way that they were. You're going to have to reinvent yourself in the context of that loss. And that's the same with COVID, right? There's no going back to pre-COVID. Things are going to be different from here on in. It's just a matter of how we're going to navigate the reinvention of ourselves in society.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And you were talking about happiness. What's your take on happiness? Because, it seems that people connect happiness, like you said, to new things, dopamine high, stuff like that.
Right.
What is your take on happiness?
So I think happiness is highly overrated. Happiness is an emotion just like any other emotion, right? Which means fundamentally that it's impermanent. It's not going to last forever. So just like you wouldn't expect sadness to be lasting forever, neither will happiness, right? And the other thing is, like, no one emotion contains enough information about the world to be your sole guide in this world, right? So imagine you only use sadness to navigate the world. You'd be in trouble really quick. Mm-hmm. Same with happiness. Happiness, is one emotion. It doesn't have enough information about the world and how to navigate it to be effective. You don't need to look any further than someone with bipolar disorder when they're in a full manic episode to see that there are a lot of downsides to being really happy. You're more impulsive, you take more chances, you tend to be more optimistic than you should be. Yep. So where I tend to take things is we want to go for meaning and contentedness, not happy. It's not even clear that our brain was designed to be like, that's not the meaning of life, I don't think. I think the meaning of life is to have meaning. And even in a tough time like this, in the COVID situation, there can be tons of meaning that you can extract from it, which can be very rewarding. It doesn't mean that you're happy, but it means that it's meaningful and that it's aligned with your values.
Okay, yeah, no, that's good enough.
Yeah.
Yes. Course. And in your experience, what would be your tricks to change your thinking process? So let's say I wake up grumpy, right? Or I'm stuck in my mind on a bad experience with my boss yesterday.
Right.
And that applies to anybody, not only people with mental illnesses, but what would be your easiest or quickest way to change this thought process, to change your whole day, basically?
There's a couple ways you could do it. So from a cognitive behavioral perspective, we have a tool called cognitive restructuring, where you identify the cognitive distortion, like black or white thinking, jumping to conclusions, overgeneralization. You learn to figure out, we have tools called thought records. You learn to figure out what distortions you have active in your thinking, and you work to restructure them with more balanced takes on things, right? Yeah. So you go through the evidence for and against your thought, and then you put together an alternative thought that's maybe a bit more well-rounded, a bit more balanced, and not sort of like aligned with that automatic negative thought that came up to you first thing in the morning. The other way you can go, I guess there's three ways. The other way you can go for it is just to say, hey, a thought is just a thought. I have the option of taking that seriously or not. It's just a product of thinking. Maybe it's garbage. Maybe it's the eternal truth. Who knows? Right? But for now, I'm just it's like a stomach gurgle of the mind, right? I don't have to take it seriously if I don't want to.
Okay.
The third way would be just to ignore it completely and just do the behavior. It's like, well, those are all the thoughts I'm having. The schedule says that I'm supposed to go out and walk the dog and wash the car in the next hour. So that's just what I'm going to do. And I'll reevaluate if that thought is helpful in an hour from now.
Okay.
Good enough. Yeah.
Yeah. So three different sort of pronged attack, I guess, for helping to restructure thinking.
And I had a question in regards to, you said you deal a lot with PTSD, right? And that's something,
right.
Because I'm ex-military. I have a lot of friends that are still active in the military. And PTSD is something that a lot of people don't understand, including myself. So what is PTSD exactly compared to other mental illnesses or any other mental disorder? What is PTSD?
If you don't mind, I'll explain it the way that I explain it to clients, let's say. Okay, so PTSD is ultimately let me just back up here. When a bad thing happens, right, what it does is that it knocks over the apple cart of your life, and it disrupts all of the beliefs that you have about yourself, the world, and other people. So you walked into that situation believing things about you. You walked into that situation believing things about other people. You walked into that situation believing things about life, let's say, right? Yeah. That trauma comes along, boom, it blows up all of that map that you've been using to understand your life. Now, just like if you woke up in a field in the morning and you had no idea where you were, you'd have to be ready for anything, right? Because who knows where the hell you are. So you're plunged into fight or flight or freeze, right? So this is what happens in PTSD. People have a map of the world, themselves and other people. The trauma comes along, it blows up that map because it doesn't make sense anymore. People don't know where they are anymore, so they end up going into fight, flight, or freeze because they've got to be ready for anything. And then the job of trauma therapy is to remap the world so that the person can start to know where they are and not be fight, flight, or freeze anymore.
Okay.
And we do that remapping by doing exposure therapy, by doing processing of stuck points, talking about moral injury, dealing with traumatic loss, all of those things. So ultimately, PTSD it's sort of your brain going into fight, flight, or freeze mode in an effort to keep you safe no matter what. The problem is that's not typically sustainable. That might over time. That might make sense for maybe a short period of time when you're in a war or something like that. But when the war is over, that response should get turned off, but it doesn't.
So that's the problem with PTSD. It stays on.
It stays on all the time.
That's right. And it stays on all the time because the world hasn't been remapped yet. Like your brain just says, hey, the last time I checked, everything was just really screwed up and people were dying all over the place.
Wow.
Right? So what you've got to do is go back and make sense of that. Like, so your brain is always trying to optimize you for today, right? And so if something really bad happened, it says, you know what? We left something really important back there on the road. We got to go figure out what the hell that was because, you know what? Matt and Jodi, they're not optimized for for life today because they haven't learned and downloaded all the information they could have from that traumatic experience that happened, right? And this is why people have flashbacks and intrusive memories because it's their brain desperately trying to get them to process what happened in order to download all the information so that they could be better optimized for dealing with life in the future.
Wow.
So would you say that the brain is always optimized for survival at the core
Always.
of everything? That's the basis of all problems or, solutions.
That's right. So even something, really painful like PTSD, it's simply the brain's attempt to optimize itself for being the most efficient survival machine it can be in that moment. Same with the nightmares and dreams that can come with PTSD. Again, that's the subcortical mind grinding through all of the things that have happened, trying to make sense of it. And it's so busy doing that it has to interrupt sleep to do that, right?
Yeah.
Right. So at the end of the day, the brain's just crying out to understand these things that happen to us, because it's like, what the hell just happened? I don't know where I am anymore. And I'm going to put us in fight, flight, or freeze until we understand what the hell's going on here. Right. So that's what all the symptoms are about. It's a withdraw, stay safe, but at the same time, think about it all the time and intrusively to try and get our act together around what the hell just went on back there.
Wow. Amazing.
And this is where, trauma therapy can be very helpful in that respect in terms of helping people sort that out for themselves.
Okay. And coming back to that fight, flight, or,
freeze
response.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's a response to stress, right? And that's a response that people have based on all sort of situations, and would you say that being in that state for a long period of time could trigger mental illnesses, or it could disrupt your brain function by just being overly stressed on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, for sure. So we know stress, in particular chronic stress and uncontrollable stress, is one of the most reliable predictors of any mental illness.
Okay.
Usually before people become depressed, they experience anxiety for a very prolonged period of time.
That's my case. So
right. So so what happens over time is that your brain goes into overdrive initially, making all those neurochemicals. But then what happens is that if you don't get any relief, it sort of cycles through all the resources. Then you ultimately get a depletion. It would almost be like, when people get overtrained weightlifting, right? If you're doing, max reps or max weight every single week, your nervous system, your endocrine system are going to break down eventually, right? They just can't keep up with the load that's being asked of week over week. So it's the same with the body. If you're doing sort of personal best lifts psychologically, let's say week over week over week over week, it's just going to break down. It's not made to operate in that way.
Okay. I see. Okay. Well, in respects to the time that you gave us today, this is your part where you can, tell people how they can reach you, how to connect with the clinic. There's the website, obviously. If you have other platforms, go ahead. And if you have any last message you want to throw at our listeners, go for it.
Yeah. Okay. So if folks want to reach us, we're at www.ottawacbt.ca. We have an appointment request form that people can access online. We have descriptions of all of our programming that's on there. Again, we've really tried to be innovative in the way that we've designed our services so that it's accessible to folks with varying levels of resources. We believe very strongly in making it accessible to as many people as possible. During the COVID crisis, we are still offering all of our services for the most part. There's a few that, of course, that are in person that we just simply can't deliver. But by and large, we are continuing to deliver services via video and teletherapy. Yeah, so I think that's the plug that I would put in for the clinic. We do group therapy, individual therapy. We also have an intensive anxiety program that people can access as well. That runs Monday through Fridays, 1 to 4 p.m. And we're doing that by video right now as well. That's for severe anxiety presentations like OCD, PTSD, social anxiety disorder, things like that. I myself, I'm not taking any new clients at the moment because I have a number of leadership roles there right now. I'm directing a couple programs. I direct the residency program. I'm doing a lot more supervision and mentorship these days. So, but there's plenty of great clinicians that we have at the clinic. So if people have liked what they've heard today, then feel free to reach out to us and get services from one of our many great clinicians.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much. doctor is your right title?
Yeah, so Dr. Pete Kelly. Yep.
For the work
Yes.
that you do, you really
Yes.
make a difference. So thank you very much.
And thanks for being on the podcast
Yes.
and helping us share the knowledge about mental health and
Bringing the awareness to other
yeah,
people
bringing the
listening.
awareness,
Thank you
so-
very much.
Thanks a lot. And for our listeners, keep following us, Living Better Podcasts. We always try to bring interesting interview. All right, guys. Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.